started and just let people join as and when they come in. So welcome everyone, thank you for being here. I'm just going to do a quick housekeeping note just to say that in the chat box I've put a file which is the film and consent form. So we are recording the session so that we can share it afterwards, and if you don't want to be on the recording, then you're free to keep your video off. If you would like to be, if you're happy to be included, then please, if you haven't already, fill out the consent form and send it to me. I'll put my email address again in the chat box. And so we're going to keep the video on throughout the presentation part from Daniel, but I'll just mute everyone until we come to the kind of discussion section later. If you do have a question or something that you want clarifying during the presentation, please put that in the chat box, and then Daniel will try and address those as and when. Otherwise, we'll come to them at the end of the presentation, and the presentation will be about 45 minutes. So just to also let anyone know that doesn't know who we are, we're the Centre for Dance Research in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities at Coventry University. And I've just popped the link to our website in the chat box as well. So if you want to go and have a little look, you can find out about us there. I'm going to hand over to Kate, who's going to tell you a bit more about the CDARE Invites series that we've been running, and then we'll get started.
Lily, welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you all in your little Zoom squares. So as Lily says, this is part of CDARE Invites, which is the Centre for Dance Research's research sharing programme. So Lily and I have been co-curating this for a couple of years now, and we've been really trying to think about how we can creatively invite researchers and practitioners into the centre to share their thinking and share their practice. So that's developed into, we've done brunches, dinners, lunches. We've yet to do an evening cabaret, which that's definitely on the agenda, but just thinking about how we can really informally invite people into our research and look at how our thinking meets other people's. So obviously we've been thrown slightly in the current situation, so we've moved into CDARE Invites online, which has actually overall been really successful, and it's meant that it's much easier for people to come into our centre and into these events because of no need to physically be there. So we've tried to carry on with the series. Loads of people have just arrived at the same moment. So we're carrying on with the series online. So this is the third or fourth of our online events. So we're really delighted that Daniel's going to share his research today. I think Lily's covered all the housekeeping. So I will hand over to Scott, who will introduce Daniel.
Thanks, Kate. This is Daniel has joined us recently as a Marie-Curie Fellow, which we worked on that grant application for a couple of years, and we're very fortunate to receive the support last year from the foundation. So he began in early April with us and hasn't been able to come, so he's in Zurich right now. And Daniel is going to explain more about his research, so I won't bother going into any of that kind of information, except that he's been for quite some time at the Zurich University of the Arts with the Institute for Computer Music and Sound Technology. Mm-hmm. And I mean, in the bio, you talk about being a researcher and an artist who kind of works at the intersection of artificial intelligence and generative art, which is something you're going to talk about in your presentation. Mm-hmm. Maybe in the conversation at the end, we may be able to talk a little bit also about some of the new directions we're taking at CDARE in terms of looking at artificial intelligence. And Daniel's become very much a part of that. So it's almost a new development that we hadn't planned on so much when we started to plan the fellowship. It's kind of interesting. The last thing I'll say before turning over to Daniel is I quite like the title of his PhD. So he really has quite a solid science background in protein crystallography. And he studied natural sciences. So you bring all of that kind of background into your work in arts, and which actually fits extremely well with our interest in interdisciplinary work. And with that, I think I'll hand it over.
Great. Thanks, Scott, for the introduction. So I have a series of slides that I will try to switch to now. And as Lily said, so please feel free to ask questions through the chat, and I will try to answer them as quickly as possible if they are kind of straightforward questions. And if I have to think a lot, then I will postpone my thinking to the end of the presentation. So let's see if I succeed in sharing. I think it's this. Can you please confirm that you see? Okay, good. Yeah, so my name is Daniel Bisig. As Scott said, I started my Marie-Curie Fellowship in April at, well, virtually at DaRE. And the Marie-Curie Fellowship will go on for 2 years. Well, it's actually going to be longer because we extended it because of the COVID-19 situation. But anyway, it means that most of my presentation will be about my past, what I have been doing before joining the Marie-Curie Fellowship. And at the end of my presentation, I have a few slides that look into the future, what I hope I can do as part of the fellowship. So let's see if I can move slides. No. Okay. So yeah, I have a background in natural sciences that I consider mostly obsolete by now. The more important background that I have is from artificial intelligence. I had worked for 6 years or so at the university in Zurich at the Artificial Intelligence Lab. And so one of my goals also with the Marie-Curie Fellowship is to combine my interest in generative art with my collaboration in dance with artificial intelligence. I don't yet know what that will look like, so that's speculation at the moment. Yeah, but what I'm showing you now is kind of history that led me to this situation that I'm now in. So first I talk a little bit about the background, about generative art itself, before I start to show examples of my work. Generative art is a field that is very diverse, that is mostly occupied by people working with computers, creating art with computers, but it's not actually something that you need a computer to work with. So the main idea of generative art is that you as an artist create a situation or a condition for an artwork to emerge on its own. So you don't create the final product. You are more interested in process, designing a process, triggering this process, and then see how this process evolves into an artwork. So this notion of automated creation of an artwork is very important. It can be fully automated, it can be partially automated in the sense that you are still influencing the process while it's happening. So if you work with computers, then typically you write the software that then executes and creates the artwork, but you can also work with other things. So people have been working with physics, real physics, to create artworks. And people have also been working with people, literally, and trying to come up with a situation that automates certain aspects of creativity. So what I'm interested in this because it's kind of a formalization of an artistic process. It forces you to think about how you would create an artwork in order to translate your thinking in something that then, for instance, a machine could do. I like it because the focus is on process. So ideally, if the audience can follow how the artwork is created while it's being created, and they might even influence how it's being created. And also I like the idea that since you work with, on the side of concept, on the side of technology, on the side of content, you have to converge all these aspects into the artwork. So nothing is kind of split off in the moment when you see as an audience the final result. So ideally, again, all these aspects are still present when the audience sees an artwork. So, and another reason I like generative art, and that has to do with my messy bio, it's very transdisciplinary. So there are a bunch of fields that come together. It's probably much more than I show in this Venn diagram. So an important art aspect is, of course, algorithmic art, working with algorithms to create artworks, interactive art, influencing what these algorithms do while they are being executed. Then a lot of inspiration, well, then on the technical side, if it comes to software engineering, of course, there is a computer science background involved, possibly also a mechanical or electrical engineering background involved. And my background in natural sciences has kind of been revived through my interest in generative art. So a lot of the algorithms that are being used, that are very popular in generative art, they originally come from natural sciences, from simulations of natural phenomena. And I have some slides, an additional slide that explains why this is the case. So generative art, I don't know whether you see my mouse pointer. From my point of view, is the convergence of all these fields. So it's this tiny little red zone where, the exchange between the fields, the inspiration coming both from art and from natural sciences is sort of culminating in. So when I was working at the university in the so-called artificial intelligence laboratory, they were studying natural phenomena, the behavior of animals and people, but not by looking at the animals and people directly, but by trying to model certain aspects of this behavior in a synthetic system. And this synthetic system, that could be a robot, for instance, like these ones. There could be a computer simulation, which is usually simpler to do. And the whole idea is that, contrary to traditional natural science, where you have a specimen like this one, and you want to understand certain aspects of its behavior, then you typically take it apart. So you move from complexity into simplicity. And while you do that, you disconnect any interplay that might have been crucial in order to create that behavior. So one of the reasons to work as a scientist in the field of synthetic natural science is that you can move from the other side. You can move bottom up, trying to reconstruct behavior by combining simple elements. So here the interplay is the main focus of interest. And I found that more attractive as a way of working. And another thing that was very strong in this group was the notion of embodied cognition. And that has got a little bit lost. That's so I feel with recent trends in machine learning, where the focus is again on computation and not so much on what is the role in the body in understanding intelligence. So embodied cognition focuses on the interplay of thinking, of experiencing the environment, of having a body that allows you to interact with the environment, about the social conditions within which you are active. So it's a more holistic approach than, traditional machine learning or traditional artificial intelligence. So this is jumping back a little bit about generative art. So how you can, for instance, work when creating an artwork. So one part of creating an artwork is this left half, that you try to think about how you would create the artwork. So it's kind of an introspection aspect is involved. And then you try to translate your own approach into something that somebody else or a machine could be doing. So it involves an abstraction and formalization part. And at the end of the formalization part, you have a system, an algorithm, a simulation, whatever, that then needs to become perceivable again. So inherently, the simulation is invisible. So you have to think about, again, a translation of rendering the activities of the simulation of the algorithm perceivable. Then you perceive what it is doing, and that might force you to rethink what your initial ideas and assumptions were. So this is an iterative process of refining your creative ideas through a stage of introspection, implementation, perception, and then you start over again. So these are a few projects that happened in the past that I would like to show and talk about. So this project is called Immersive Lab. That's something that has been going on for quite a while at the Zurich University of the Arts, where I have formerly been employed. So it's an installation in the shape of a cylinder, and the installation shows video. It shows audio, so people who enter the installation are surrounded by a kind of panoramic video image, by a kind of panoramic sound, and the interaction response is interactive and it responds to touch. So when people touch the screen, something might happen. And the installation is meant as a platform for different artworks to be shown by different artists. So when artists create a piece, they have to deal with the situation that multiple people can be in the installation, and people interact with their work through touch. And the reason for focusing on touch was motivated by a kind of frustration with many kind of interactive systems, how they deal with interaction, that the interaction part might be obfuscated by the technology. So it's very unclear for people how they can influence things, when they are being in charge of influencing something, and how the artwork, the interactive artwork responds. And by using touch, we were thinking that we are using a very archetypical way of interaction that closes this gap between the audience, the technology, and the artwork. So when you touch something, you feel the touch, you know that you intentionally were touching. It's not something, so you have the agency to interact or not to interact. And it's also something that works very well for multiple people. So it can also have a social aspect involved. So we created this installation initially with the idea that we wanted to show generative art in a more spatial manner, not just on a flat 2D screen. And this has expanded, this idea, in the meantime. So we had artists and also some scientists creating works that had nothing to do with generative art at all, that were, for instance, more looking at collaboration among multiple people when they interact with an artwork, or how people perceive themselves when they are being filmed and shown in the installation while they are being interacting. But I show you a brief excerpt. I hope the video, that's the risky part of my presentation, apart from my semi-broken English. I don't know how well the video plays, so I just try, and if it doesn't work, please tell me. So this is a piece I've been doing together with a composer from the same institute, Philip Hofer.
Yeah, it works well enough on my.
It works well enough. Okay, cool.
Well enough, I think.
And this is a generative work. So there are things moving around in simulation space, and these things, they control the video and the audio that's being generated. And the things, they respond to not only each other, but also to people who touch. So when someone touches, they create additional elements in space that become visible to the simulated beings. Okay, so I move on because I have really a lot of examples and I don't want to lose too much time before I start a little bit about the Marie-Curie Fellowship. So this is a piece that's very much in work in progress. It's a collaboration with Harald Kimmich, he's the violinist in the foreground, me and somebody who is more or less invisible, that's Ephraim Wegner. He is a computer musician. And the piece is called, well, it doesn't have a name at the moment, so the working title is Springs. And the idea of the piece is that you want to converge all the contributions of all the participants, of the violinists, of the computer musicians, and of me, who is creating visuals in this piece, through the same simulation, or the same physical principle. And that's one of the things I find attractive about generative art. So since the simulation itself is not visible, you can use it to translate into any media form, and that allows you to create a coherence between different media without restricting the media to directly respond to each other. So it's not a superficial coherence, it's a coherence based on an algorithm, based on a kind of particular type of behavior. So in this example, we were focusing on strings. So a violin obviously is a physical instrument that uses strings, vibrations of strings to create sound. So we were using simulations of strings, and for that you use springs. That's the reason it's called Springs, this piece at the moment. We are using simulations of strings to also create synthetic sound and to create synthetic visuals. And so it's a shared algorithm, that's part of the concept, but it also shapes part of the interaction. So since all the systems, the digital ones and the acoustics, the physical one, use the same physical principle, they can excite themselves through the same physical principle. So an oscillation, vibration of a string on a violin is being recorded, can cause an oscillation in a string that's a digital string for sound synthesis, or that's a digital string for image synthesis. So the violinist, through this matching of physical principles, also controls the behavior of the synthetic sound and of the image. So I have a brief movie, which is unfortunately doesn't involve the synthetic sound yet, because we still have to have our rehearsals. They are just upcoming, but it gives you an idea of how the how the image responds to sound. So the image is subdivided into regions, and each region has a boundary consisting of springs. And these springs, they oscillate in response to the sound that's being played. The image itself that is used as basis for creating these visual springs can be a live image from a camera or can be a stored image like here. So here it just goes through a bunch of different visualizations based on this spring system. So I jump a little bit around. Come on, that wasn't a good idea. And at the same time, I'm free to influence the spring simulation. So it's kind of a collaboration with the violinist. The violinist controls the oscillations. I can control how the springs are created and other aspects of the simulation. Okay, so this is a piece that's a little bit an older one. It's called Pendulum, and it's relevant for my work in the context of dance, because here I was looking specifically at embodiment, physical embodiment, not of humans, but of machines, and connectedness. Connectedness is a term that I have stolen from Sue, from this interview I had with her. So the idea that when you perform as a human or a machine, all the elements of the performance are not separated elements, but they are integrated into an overall thing. And it's this relationship between all these components, this connectedness with the components, that in the end shapes what you do and how you perceive the performance. So this example, the physical things, I move to the next slide, so it's easy to see what they are. They are small robots hanging from a ceiling. They have rotors here that allow them to move, so they act as pendulums and as active pendulums through the activity of the rotors, and they carry either a microphone or a loudspeaker. And there was a total of 4 of them, and the piece is a musical installation. So the music that is being created is through acoustic feedback, microphones recording loudspeakers, and this causing acoustic feedback. And the movement of the things changes the orientation and distance between loudspeakers and microphones. So it's the movement that in the end creates the music. So I have again a video. Everything is always dark in my videos, I apologize. But these are different scenes that was shown in an exhibition, and the space itself is fabulous. It's a pity you can't see it. It's a roof in a very old building that's maybe 6 or 7 meters high. So again, I jump a little bit. So the behaviors they are doing are kind of remote controlled. There are certain types of behaviors, how they move their arms, how fast they spin their rotors. Okay, oops, sorry, too fast. And I think this is the last example. There's nothing to do with dance. And from then on, I show dance pieces I've been working on. So this is a very old piece called Cycles that I've created with a Japanese colleague of mine, Tatsuo Naimi. And the idea is about coexistence of a human visitor with a digital system. And the digital system is a simulation of, again, things moving through space. They resemble a little bit bacteria living in a petri dish. So the things, they can only exist if they are being nourished. And the nourishment comes from the visitor. So the setup is as follows. It's a one-person piece, kind of one visitor at a time piece. A visitor puts his or her hand on a table. The hand is being filmed from a camera up here. The projection is directly on the hand. And the hand is being treated as a source of nutrition for the bacteria or whatever the simulated beings are. And then they start to reproduce, to populate the hand. They go through kind of life cycles. And at the end of a life cycle, they die, but they can only stay alive while the hand is being present as a constant source of nutrition. So this is sort of fast forward through these life cycles. So this is screen recordings. Initially, there is no hand. As soon as a hand appears, the things will spiral in onto the center of the hand. So this is already the next stage. Things start to spread out. They follow the contours of the hand. They start to grow, spreading in from the fingertips. So this is without sound, intentionally, this piece. Yeah, and at some point they start to destroy the hand that's feeding them. Up to a point where they then die because the hand has been destroyed. Okay, so I like to think that these pieces I've been doing that have nothing to do have inspired some of my interests to work together with photographers and dancers. So I have been working very frequently so far with a small dance group from Spain, Instituto Stocos. The photographer is Miriam Romero, and her husband and collaborator is Pablo Palacio, a composer. And we have created several pieces together. And my way of working with, or trying to work with dancers in the combination with generative art, is that I create a system, an interactive system for stage that is being influenced by the dancers and to what the dancers can respond to. So that the dancer becomes part of the behavior of the synthetic system, and that it establishes kind of improvisational feedback loop. So the dancer performs in response, partially in response to what the synthetic system is doing, and the synthetic system is then responding to that, which might give for the dancer new cues what to do. And the dancer is then kind of the main source of what's being created through the synthetic system, whether it's audio or video. Since it's a combination of the dancer's complexity and the synthetic system's complexity that creates this material. And without the dancer, much of this complexity would be absent. So without the dancer, the piece itself, or the media in the piece itself, wouldn't exist. And what I like to focus on when working with dance and generative art is, again, this idea of correspondence between the dancer and the media on an algorithmic level, not on a superficial level, and I have an example of that. I'm interested in the relationship between the dancers, or the dancer and the system, whether the system responds immediately and in a very kind of cause-effect manner, or whether the system has more freedom how to respond. And that's what I have kind of here, this idea that the artificial system can be, if it responds immediately, it's kind of an extension of the human body. The dancer can work as if playing an instrument. If the system doesn't respond so immediately, but still in a clear cause and effect manner, then it's maybe more like manipulating a physical thing, playing with sound, whatever. Or the system can have a high level of autonomy, and then you could consider it to be an artificial dancer with whom you are dancing together. And the third thing I'm interested in is how do you make the system present on stage in a manner that the presence of the dancer and the presence of the system don't compete with each other, but coexist. So some of the questions that keep me busy while working towards these dance pieces is how can I make the algorithms of generative systems perceivable for the dancer in a manner that doesn't interfere with their own attention that they need to have towards their own body, towards other dancers. So how to integrate the generative system into the experiential awareness of the dancers. Then what kind of behaviors are useful for a dance performance, behaviors on the side of the artificial system. And some of the inspirations I have been drawing on a relatively superficial level, but still it's kind of important inspirations, come from cognitive science. So the idea of body image and body schema, and how you can integrate something that's not originally part of your body into your body image. So if you treat the artificial system as an extension of your body, then it would be interesting to see how you can make this extension consciously and unconsciously part of a dancer's body. And I have been also looking a little bit into strategies in prosthesis design. So in prosthesis design, obviously the issue of body ownership, how do you make an artificial element of your body in such a manner that people consider it to be really part of their body, that they have possession over it. And then again, the notions of agency. So how should the system operate, and is it useful if the system has kind of a freedom to perceive its environment and influence its environment? And some of the, I don't know, maybe more modern notions of agency fit kind of my attitude towards it, which is that agency is not the property of an individual. Agency is something that's shared with a context, shared between an individual and its social setting or the environmental properties. So in the end, I'm trying to achieve something where agency maybe manifests on the whole stage and not so much only on the simulation part. So this is the first piece I have been creating together with my friends from Instituto Stocos. Instituto Stocos is called Stocos because of this piece. So Stocos comes from the idea of stochastic, which is a combination of randomness and determination. And in this piece, I've been working with swarm simulations. I won't go into detail what swarm simulations exactly are. Swarm simulations are one of the kind of archetypical simulations of biological behaviors of animals or people moving in group in a coordinated manner. And for this piece, I have been interested in two types, I think, of relationships between what the simulation does and what happens on stage. One type of relationship deals with space. So typically the simulation has its own space, the simulation space, within which the simulated organisms, creatures exist. Then the stage again is its own space, and you could consider the dancer's body also as being its own space. So how do you put these three types of spaces in relationship to each other? That was one of my questions. And then the second thing is the behavioral relationship between dancers and the simulation and the music. So the music is also created synthetically. And so here I was looking at ways of having the dancer create trajectories in space, these trajectories being recorded, and then the simulated agents and the music responding to these trajectories. So trajectories can be created through movement by the dancers, so kind of dominant movements would be followed and create traces in space. or they can be created through the simple physical appearance of the dancer as kind of a distance field that points from every region of a simulation space towards the dancers, which causes the agents then to move towards the dancers. So this is just an arbitrary simulation that has nothing to do with this piece. It just shows literally what some of these agents are doing when they move in a flocking type of manner. The music itself is created, it's a method that has been invented by Yannis Xenakis. It's called dynamic stochastic synthesis. And Pablo has chosen this method because it resembles in the way that it creates sound to what the flocking simulation does and how dancers move through space. So the waveform is directly created through the movement of particles, Brownian movement of particles, and they move randomly in a one-dimensional space, a vertical space. And at certain moments in time, you just sample where this particle is, and that gives you the point, the amplitude of the waveform. So again, it's kind of a sharing of common principles of movement between dancers, simulation, and music. So I have a few excerpts of this piece. I'll play them. So here the idea is that the dancer performs a kind of duet with 5 swarming agents. And the duet alters between her moving and the agents not moving versus her being still and the agents moving. I think how I'm doing on time. I skipped this and show you another scene from the same piece that shows you a little bit more how the simulation, the visual simulation, can deal with space. So initially, obviously it fills the space, superseding the presence of the dancers, the visual presence of the dancers. And now it's currently moving towards body space. And the video should play 2 times as fast, but I think you get the idea. Okay, so the second piece I would like to talk about is actually it's 2 pieces, but they have both the same approach. One is called Pendulum, the other is called Polytopia. It's again together with my friends from Institute of Stocos. The first title of the piece conveys a little bit better, I think, what my part of the idea was. So the idea is that the simulation plays the role of an additional body part of a dancer, and a body part that is both physically and on a behavioral level directly related to what the dancer is doing. So again, it's a sharing of, on an algorithmic level, a sharing of the same principles. the dancer is being modeled as a skeleton. That's a typical classical kind of Kinect type of skeleton that models a few body joints, or displays a few body joints. And then the simulated body part is also a system, interconnected system of joints, but they have been designed by me. So these are artificial joints. And these joints, some of these joints can be literally, physically, as in simulation, of course, be connected to the joints of the dancer. And they can also be behaviorally connected to the dancer through elements that sense movement of the dancers, through a very simple neural network, something that resembles a little bit the brain of this body segment, and then through something that resembles muscles of the body structure. So the idea is that this body extension behaves partially based on what the dancer is doing and partially behaves on its own. And the name phantom limb, of course, is inspired by this medical condition of people missing a limb and still feeling as the limb was being present, while lacking the control, for instance, concerning pain, to control that limb. So this is, I would say, my first attempt to combine kind of machine learning. It's not machine learning in the strictest sense because it uses a different type of approach, but it's a learning approach to use machine learning with generative art. And the goal of machine learning was to give these things, this is a body segment with the dancer, without the dancer attached to it, to give these things a behavior that responds to the behavior of the dancer. So this is the activities of the neural network, that this creature has, this body segment has. And you see how this activity changes on the right side, on the left side, how you see how this neural activity translates into movement of the creature. So the physics is a bit shaky. So it keeps moving more than you would expect it to move, but yeah, that wasn't really critical for the performance. So the neural network has been created automatically, not by me. And the goal of the neural network was to try to align, synchronize the movement of this creature with the movement of a particular dancer, so that the body segment will become very specific and very sensitive to this, to how this particular dancer moves. That was the stage setup for the phantom limb piece. And here I was, for the first time, playing with the superposition of the dancer's presence with the presence of the visual presence of the simulation. And for this, we use a transparent screen, this thing here, which hangs between the dancer and the audience. And depending where you sit as audience, the visual image is more or less well aligned, superimposed on the dancer. So I have, again, a few films. I'll show you maybe only one of them. So this scene is called the hand because the body part looks a little bit, the synthetic body part looks a little bit like a hand. So this is a screen recording, skeleton of the dancer interacting, the body segment attaching, detaching from the skeleton to different joints. And in the second half of the video, you should see a section of the live performance. Hopefully. Yeah. So the repetition now is a breakup of the sound that wasn't part of the video. Okay, so I have 9 minutes left, so I would, oh, well, I'm there. I would like now to jump into my plans for the E2 Create. That's the name of my Marie-Curie Fellowship project. So I have done already a little bit of work in these 2 months, but most of the work is still ahead of me. So some of the things that I've written down here, this is speculation. But what is clear, I mean, first of all, the fellowship is hosted at CDER, at the Coventry University, and it involves two additional institutions. One is Motion Bank at the Fachhochschule Mainz, and the other one is Instituto Stocos, again, my dance partners from Madrid. And the project involves three parts. One is a learning part. So the goal of the project is for me to gain a better understanding of how choreographers and dancers work. So how the notion of embodied creativity, what that means for choreographers and how they deal with it. And another part of my learning experience has to do with ways of digitizing dance and documenting dance through this digitalization. Then there is a research part involved that has yet to start, that deals with finding ways of abstracting embodied creativity so that these abstractions can be used in the context of generative art, for instance, for simulation-based approaches in generative art, and also finding ways of combining generative art with machine learning. And the third part is a creation part. The creation part involves the realization of a dance performance at the end of the fellowship, together with Instituto Stocos, to sort of exemplify what I have been learning in the meantime. And it also involves the development of software. And this software is meant to be a tool, creative tool, for artists and partly creative coders. So it's a tool that artists can use to develop their own computer-based interactive artworks. And so far, I have been focusing on learning more about principles of embodied creativity. I do that mostly through interviews with choreographers and dancers. So far, I had 2 interviews with Jonathan and Sue. And I try to ask them not only questions that I am specifically interested in, otherwise I would be kind of guiding the interview from my limited understanding of what I think embodied creativity is. So most of my questions are very specific to their work, how they develop a piece, what kind of connections exist between different pieces, how they try to address and integrate the audience, things like this. And in the end, I have more general and generic questions that then relate to my plan to abstract some of these concepts. So I ask them questions such as, how would you imagine that your piece could exist in digital form if you know that this digital form won't show any dancers? So that there is a lot of things are going to missing in this digital form. So which aspects for you will be essential to be preserved despite this level of abstraction? So that would be a classical question of mine. And then I'm interested in looking again a little bit more, and maybe a little bit in a more informed manner, into transdisciplinary research projects that happen between dancers, choreographers, and scientists, in particular cognitive scientists or social scientists. But this is more a passive role that I'm playing here. So I'm just trying to keep track what, for instance, Carla is doing is her black box project, or what the Siobhan Davis dance studio is doing in collaboration with Guido, I always forget the second name, Orge, as a cognitive scientist in the NeuroLife project. Then the digitization part involves, well, the main focus for me to look into dance and dance documentation is based on videos, video recordings of rehearsals, video recordings of performances, because video recordings are abundant in dance. So it's a very important source that exists. And so one thing I try to look into from a purely, not an artistic point of view, just a pragmatic functional point of view, is how can you extract information from a video that might help you in documenting that particular dance piece, and that might also help you in deriving algorithms that, you know, mimic or simulate or capture some aspects of this piece. So for instance, the classical thing that people are doing nowadays with dance videos is pose estimation. And that's a machine learning based approach to extract body joints from a video without using specialized equipment. So that works relatively well in the 2-dimensional case. It doesn't work very well in the 3-dimensional case when you try to get 3-dimensional coordinates for body joints out of a 2-dimensional video. But that's something I'm looking into, and that might also become a collaboration with some of the scientists that work on that. And I'm also looking, of course, not only at how to extract body posture from video, but also how do you, more in a manual manner, extract semantic information from a video, think about what, from your point of view, happens in the video, how do you accumulate this information, how do you align this information with the original video material. So the idea of creating, for instance, the online scores that contain annotations of videos, that contain visualizations, abstract visualizations of dance principles, that's also something I'm looking into. Then this is now purely speculation. So my interests in combining generative art with dance will be mostly focusing on principles of embodied creativity. And I have here two examples, both older examples, one from dance, one from science, that I think reflects nicely how you can think about embodied creativity and simulating embodied creativity. So one is a piece called Chiseling Bodies by Sarah Alawi and some dancers. And she's using simulation of spring simulation, and treats the spring simulation as an artificial entity, as the second dancer. And she has been thinking how to translate in a metaphorical manner certain principles, qualities of movement, mostly based on Laban principle, Laban effort qualities, to this artificial system. And the other work that I find interesting, also it's 2012 by Hod Lipson. It's a robotics project in which a robot has a task to learn how to walk. And the interesting thing about this robot is that the robot, when it's being born, kind of, doesn't know anything, not only about how to walk, it doesn't know anything about its body. It doesn't know whether it has 3 legs, 4 legs. So it engages in kind of an exploration that involves interaction with the environment, sensing its own body in order to construct its own body image. And based on this body image, it learns to walk. And this is, I think, the last slide, so I'm not so bad in time. So the question of how to combine generative art and machine learning also involves the questions whether it's useful to combine generative art and machine learning. And I have a very ambivalent attitude towards that. First of all, machine learning, of course, machine learning is a hype, so it helps you to get funding, it helps you to get visibility, but it's hard for an artist to find a way of working with machine learning that allows him to really focus on his own approach. So machine learning at the moment, especially more recent approaches based on deep learning, these are very complex models that have, you know, a lot of research went into the creation of these models, and a lot of computational power is required in order to run these models, to train these models. But these are all facilities that an artist doesn't have. So how can an artist then work with these machine learning models without treating them as a black box, as a tool that just spits something out based on the behavior that has been designed by somebody else, not the artist, him or herself. So how can the artist again gain agency and authorship when working with machine learning? That's one of my questions. So the image here on the right is a very simple machine learning system that I've been involved in as part of a small research project with a researcher from Canada, Kivan Stotar, from the Simon Fraser Institute University. And this is a machine learning system, a very simple one that tries to learn music, abstract music, based on recordings of music, and create kind of a map of these music pieces. So what you're seeing here are traces, and each trace corresponds to a particular music piece that starts here and ends here. And so you see how the system learns the continuity of the piece. So each of the single dots in this trace is a snapshot of music, and the piece has learned some of the continuity, and it has learned to distinguish the different pieces to keep them apart from each other. So for me, that this kind of representation might be interesting to tie it again into generative art. So the generative art aspect then would be that you try to find ways to navigate this space of sound. For instance, to try to follow a part of the region of an audio piece and then look for position where it's very close to another audio piece, and then you branch over to the other audio piece. So you create kind of morphings and splittings of audio pieces based on something that the machine learning system has learned. But it's still up to you to come up with strategies how you would navigate to that. So that would be a possible combination of for artists using machine learning and generative art. Okay, I think that's it. I'm at the end. I haven't looked at the chat. I hope I didn't miss any questions. But now you have time to ask questions. I will stop the sharing.
Thanks, Daniel.
Okay. Yeah, I'm all ears.
Thank you so much. That was really, really fascinating. So we don't have any questions in the chat box, but what Lily and I have been doing is asking people to, I don't know if everyone can access their, well, this is now a big test for me. You can do a thumbs up. I'm not sure how you, I think you can raise your hand if you hover over the dots. No, oh. Lily, are you there? How do you raise a hand?
If you go to the bottom of participants
Thanks,
list,
Sarah.
you can raise your hand. If you go to the bottom.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. So if you want to ask a question, you click on participants. Yeah, as Sarah says, there's a raise hand option, and I can keep an eye out for raised hands. Yeah, and also Lily, to answer your question, you can. It's fine to also put questions in the chat box, and I can share them, or you can read them out to Daniel.
Yeah.
And also,
hi.
Hi, Lily. Do you have a question?
Hey. Yes, I have a question. Maybe it's a bit too general, but I would really appreciate advice where to start with creative coding and generative art. I have background in both dance as well as physics, and I'm doing some coding now. And the hardest thing is actually to find open source tools, basically, like especially for postural analysis. I've been looking for that for such a long time that finally I've engaged a friend to help me develop it. But like where, if I mean, where to find that, or is that available? But also, where would you advise someone like me with BA in science, MA in dance, where to go if I am more interested in that? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's a very difficult question. It's something I'm also still struggling with. So there is no universal tool or program environment available that I think satisfy what people want to do, especially if they try to combine music and visuals. So at the moment, it's kind of a binary decision whether you want to focus more on the visual aspect of generative art or the musical part. So I'm working with processing and open frameworks as creative coding platforms, which have a very strong visual bias. So they are not very useful for working with audio. Processing is very friendly towards newcomers. It's very well documented. It's Java based. It has a huge community. So it's usually a good starting point. It has a point, like every user-friendly system, where you reach a barrier where things become arbitrarily complicated to do things, or where it also becomes too slow simply. And Open Frameworks is a community initiative. It's an environment based on C++. It's much more rough. It's much less well documented. So I usually tell people to avoid that unless they are already familiar a little bit with C++. So unless they are familiar with reading, understanding an environment through reading the code of the environment. And there are other systems. Cinder is one, also C++. There are systems that are specific sort of for kind of artificial life types of approaches. I'll have to, maybe I can send afterwards some links around if I can't remember stuff like in the moment. Yeah, so one is really a multi-agent system. So you write programs in an environment that's meant to simulate how individual creatures in a group interact with each other or interact with an environment. So this gives you a kickstart if you're interested in these type of models, but at the same time it prevents you, it's less generic. And then on the audio side, so I'm not an audio person, so I don't have any direct experience with these systems, but a lot of people either you work with Max, MSP, or PD. These are kind of visual programming languages, paradigms, and they are very good at sound synthesis, or also sample-based music. And some people work with SuperCollider. SuperCollider is, again, a textual programming language based on Smalltalk, which is very popular, especially also among live coders, because you can do things on the fly and listen to it.
Daniel.
Yep.
You said you were gonna. You could also just send some of those around.
Oh, before I spend hours and hours. Then the second question about the postural analysis, open source tools for that. Well, I have been. It's not an open source tool. I have been working with IceWeb. That's this software by Infomos. We were in Genoa during MOCO 2 years ago. So it's a visual programming environment that's focused on analyzing sensor data, whether that's motion capture data, whether that's like acceleration sensors on the body, or it could also be audio recordings, video recordings. And it has all kinds of functionalities that aid you in this analysis. But again, it's a monstrosity with a steep learning curve. So in the end, everybody ends up having a mosaic of tools that they have to figure out how to combine. And usually it's also helpful if you are several people, then so one person can focus on that and the person can focus on something else.
So Daniel, we have two questions. We have a question first from Simon. Simon, do you want to ask that yourself, or Daniel, you could read it from the chat box? Or I can read it.
Oh, I also put my hand up.
Oh, sorry, Scott. I'm
Okay,
not going to get into internal politics. Simon was first.
Simon said just.
Okay. Oh, so difficult questions.
You see it, Daniel. You're up.
I read it out loud for a moment. So if I can prevent it from scrolling upwards because yeah. I'm curious about the flow of information, ideas, and understanding across disciplines. Do you have a sense that your work in dance has some value to machine learning and artificial intelligence in the real world, in brackets? Or perhaps there is more a sense that you are inserting understanding from machine learning into the dance tech field? Okay. So concerning the flow of information, I found it very helpful to collaborate transdisciplinary with people who have whatever faint background in my discipline as well. So for instance, Kivanch, he is a computer scientist, but he also works as a musician, hobby musicians, but still he has an affinity to music. So that helps with the sharing of interests and the motivation to work on a particular project, which I think is the most essential thing, apart from a sharing of language, that the motivation is matching. And I think the main problem of flow of information and ideas between disciplines are the different goals of the disciplines. So that a dancer, choreographer, artists like myself has usually quite different goals than scientists. So goals in the sense of I want to have a performance, I want to learn more, I want to have more means to create a piece, and the scientist might have a very specific focus on a particular aspect that is then way too narrow from my point of view. But that needs to be so narrow that the scientist can publish anything about it. So this is kind of the inherent problem of sharing information. Whether the things I do has an impact on AI, I doubt it. First of all, well, there is this idea that we want to work together with a group from the Max Planck Institute who works on pose estimation on video, 3D pose estimation. And that has yet to be decided whether that happens. But here the benefit from that we could provide as dancers and artists to this group is that we provide test scenarios. So it's kind of probably an obvious benefit. So many of these systems, pose estimation systems from video, they suffer from a very narrow understanding of what posture is, of what movement is, what can happen in a video. And accordingly, if you use one of these systems that's been pre-trained by the scientists and use it on a dance video, then this thing will fail. It will fail when dancers are too close to each other. It will fail when dancers are on the floor and things like this. So we hope that we could provide scenarios that are relevant to us, that are kind of realistic situations on a dance stage, that challenge the systems, that challenge the scientists to come up with better designs, better training methods for their machine learning systems. Then, concerning the machine learning systems itself, I mean, I would like to focus on systems that I fully understand, that I'm able to modify, and these are necessarily not the most bleeding edge systems. So the result might be that I will come up with systems that are more valuable for artists because they give them access to kind of a more intuitive access to actually work on the algorithms of the systems itself than the more complex systems. But that also means that it's probably less interesting for scientists. But that is really my interest, that I want to have an understanding on the level of functionality and algorithm of a machine learning system, and not just an understanding of what goes in and what comes out.
Thanks, Daniel. Scott, do you want to pop in there, and then we'll go on to Susan, because Susan's got a two-parter and Rosa is in the queue. But Scott, you had your hand up.
No, I just that I was reminded of the experiments in art and technology in the late 60s, you know, where Cage and Deborah Hay and Steve Paxton, they all worked together. And they're very much exploring systems. So there's a real sense of trajectory, systems thinking and cybernetics and things. I think I would prefer, I think we could let it, I just wanted to, you know, John Conway, who was famous for Artificial Life.
He died from COVID.
He did recently.
Yeah.
But on that,
sorry.
No, I think Susan's question is great. So I would just go ahead with following on from there. Thanks very much, Daniel.
Susan, shall I just leave it to you to ask?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and ask. Thanks, Kate. No, thank you, but I'm presently working with a composer and a computer scientist. And from the way you were delivering it, I may take it wrong, it does feel like there's kind of a hierarchy status of kind of following on from what Simon asked about inserting in this learning into the dance field instead of coming to the table as equal entities. And the person I'm working with at the moment, it was adamant that we come in as equal entities. And also we have two dancers who are equal components, as you said, this kind of shared agency, not only between ourselves, but also between the agency of the algorithms of the coding itself, etc. And it was very adamant for that. So I was trying to understand that world, and I work a lot with imagery, so and in images, and I work with film and photographic stills. So for me, he understood that, and Jamie understood that, and so we were finding in between places where we could really come together and find new, and also delineate and distill and throw away things that wouldn't work, also because we're working at incredible distances. I'm in Singapore and he's in London, and that's already problematic. But I'm wondering, because it feels like the work is being, I'm not going to say imposed, but it feels like the language and the curiosity and the questions are more coming from your end than from the end of, and I'm just wondering about these conversations, and even when you spoke about Sue and Jonathan and about what needs to be held. But I'm thinking, if we come to the table at the beginning, we don't know what needs to be held. You know, it's like making new, it's processing new. So I'm coming at you with that. And I think as a dancer and as a maker, I'm really keen on that. And I'm not that precious to hold on to certain things if I come in with a collaborator, so that it really becomes transdisciplinary. So I don't know if I'm making sense to you, but that's
you make sense very much. So concerning meeting each other on equal ground and sharing ideas on equal ground, I think it worked for me at least, and I hope my dance colleagues share this opinion, in the case of Instituto Stocos. And one of the reasons is simply that we have been working together for several years, so we have sort of become accustomed to each other's way of thinking, talking, and interests. And one of the amazing things when working with Instituto Stocos has been, and that's very unlike to other collaborations I had with dancers, that we were working together from the very early conceptual stages up to the point where we had the premiere. So the whole sharing of ideas without even knowing whether these ideas will find their place in a piece has happened together. And I think that is one of the important things, that you do follow through the whole process of creating a piece from the very first sparks of ideas to the end through a collaborative process. And I know that's not possible for many people. It's costly, and a lot of scientists simply don't have the time because they have pressure to do other things. So they usually come up for a moment and they leave again. So these short moments of encounters, I think they work good if it's just a discussion, but they don't work so well if it's a collaboration. Because then you make so many assumptions what you might contribute to the dance piece that are obviously then not well aligned. And then another reason that I think it worked from my point of view well with Instituto Stocos is that Muriel and Pablo have been working together for a long time. Pablo had from the very beginning, he's a musician, works with computer music, a very strong algorithmic focus. So he was kind of had a kinship with me, just in the musical domain. And Muriel has worked in several of her pieces trying to embody some of the principles how he creates music, some of his algorithmic principles. So for instance, using the concept of random movement or Brownian movement on stage. So how do you work with that if you try to embody that? So for this to cut it short, I think it helped a lot that these two artists, Muriel and Pablo, had already been working and thinking along similar lines as I did, just using different tools, using the body or using different media. So there wasn't much of a gap initially to cross. The bigger problem I had was about media presence on stage, video versus dance versus audio, and I can't remember your second question.
No, it was kind of it was just kind of combined, but it's just that kind of sense of how language can change and evolve if you're coming to the forefront together and you're sharing together. I mean, the strange thing that I'm doing at present with this collaborator who is in this realm is, if anything, we came to the table with a kind of similar desire aesthetically, and we're not interested in a product at all. It's about how do we reveal our process or our questioning to a larger public. And it's been changing continuously, especially this year, because of the problematic issues that have happened this year. So, but yet we're using it, we keep going because we feel like, okay, this is another limitation. So what do I let go of? What are we now learning from this? So we're really interested in the cognition. We're interested in the kind of translation of knowledge. And I guess maybe that's our focus, or our priority, I should say.
One more, I remember just that you also mentioned the issue of what should be preserved in a dance piece, and that nobody knows what should be preserved. So my experience so far has been a positive one in these two interviews, that both Jonathan and Sue had clear ideas of what should be preserved. It might have to do that with the fact, and Sue can confirm or do the opposite, that she has also been involved, of course, with Motion Bank. We see there where this topic is an important thing. So also when you talk about digitizing dance, I mean, digitizing dance is a process that's not lossless. You lose a lot of things. So what needs to be preserved is an important aspect of dance documentation, dance digitization, that you have to think about when you are yourself involved in this process. And also that the fact that she has been involved in the replay archive kind of forced her to think about these issues. And maybe Forsyth is a very peculiar case, that he then very specifically addressed that when translating dance into the digital domain and abstracting dance, this notion of what should be preserved. So I think it's not a question that is impossible to ask. And I had the feelings from the replies I got from Jonathan and Sue that this was a very reflected reply and very helpful to me, at least.
Daniel, thank you. I think we've got one question from Rosa. If we just go, I'm just keeping a little eye on time. Rosa, do you want to ask that, or do you want me to read it out?
I think it just follows along with what we've been talking about around process and, you know, entering a space as equals. And so I was just curious, Daniel, if the dancers you've worked with were interested in your process, and how, if they were, how that informed or if that shifted anything that was happening in the studio or in that work. And I guess the last part of that question is, how important is that for you, that they understand your process of coding and, you know, making as well?
Yeah. Well, there is a very practical aspect to it. We'll start with that because that's easier to answer. So I think it's important that everybody involved in the process of creating a dance piece understands sort of the time that is required for everybody to contribute something, and the interval that's required for everybody to contribute something. So that there are phases where you appreciate that everybody works on his or her own, that then there are phases when people come together. So that the timing of this is well aligned, and that can be very hard with, I notice, with dancers who are used to improvisation, who want to try things quickly and move from one thing to the next. So I can usually barely keep up in this situation. I think that is important. So this understanding of time requirements, of flexibility, of the ability to be spontaneous, what it means to be spontaneous from somebody who writes software, and what it means to be spontaneous for somebody who dances or choreographs. There can be very different things. And the other thing, let's see, I keep forgetting when I talk too much. Can you repeat the first part?
Yeah, how curious people have been in your process.
It depends very much on the character of each dancer. So when working with Muriel, she was a dancer, has become choreographer, still dances a little bit, but is mainly a choreographer now. But while she was still dancing, she was interested in sort of engaging with whatever sketchy thing I had at that point in time. Whether it looked like anything that you could show on stage or not was irrelevant. So for her, it was important to evaluate from her point of view the potential what this stuff had for her. And I think that this was great. So I wouldn't work to go on a certain trajectory thinking that this might be really valuable for the dance piece. And then it turns out that it had nothing to do with the interests of the dancers. but that I would really, in very small iterative steps, meet the dancers again, show them what I had, get their feedback, and also their feedback not only concerning how they felt they could interact with it, but also their feedback what they thought the system should do differently. So that they were actually also thinking about the behavior of the system itself. Not in a computer science terminology, of course, but from their point of view, what they understood about interesting behavior and about interesting relationships between behaviors. I think this has been a really important guiding principle for me. And without these guiding principles, I might have ended up somewhere totally different. Then, while she was working more as a choreographer, things have shifted because she had, I think, a little bit more a top-down view on what she wanted to achieve. So the dancers' role, who were then interacting with what I was creating, was a different one. So some of the dancers were curious to improvise, other dancers were maybe curious to improvise, but they were told to not improvise. So then we had to come up with a different kind of negotiation. This negotiation was more about the structure of the whole situation, which I would show my part, and the timing of different segments and the composition of segments and how things are aligned, the music and the dances. So it was more about predictability and shape, dramaturgic shape of the whole situation.
Great.
Did that answer? Okay.
Thanks, Daniel. So there's a couple of comments, but not questions in the chat box. So maybe that's something, Daniel, that you can look at. I can record the chat and you can look at later. Just in terms of time, does anybody have a question just before we wrap up? I'm just aware of other people having meetings to go to and sticking to time. But if anybody wants to pop their hand up, we've got time for another question. Can't see any hands. I don't think I'm missing one. So I think probably just I'll close that on behalf of Lily and myself and the centre. Just thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing your research today.
You're welcome.
Genuinely, really, really interesting. And I think I get the impression from the chat that we could have kind of gone in lots of different directions. It feels like there's a really rich conversation to be had around that. Yeah, so we've recorded the chat. Are we sharing? Are we recording it for our records, Lily? I should know that. Or is it shareable?
The chat or the
recording, the whole thing.
Yeah, we want to be able to share it wider, yeah, so it'll be shareable on the YouTube.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So oh, sorry, Lily, I cut you off.
Carry
on. It's so wonderful to see so many of you. I think Lily and I both really, it's so exciting for us that so many people are coming into these. On that note, on the 22nd of July at 12 o'clock until 1:30, we will be hosting our next DaRE Invites online event, and that will be a conversation between Jonathan Burrows and Siobhan Davis, facilitated by Sarah Watley. So it would be lovely to see lots of you there, and bring your lunch along. That's the idea, that we have our virtual lunches together. So Lily and I will send out more information about that nearer the time, but July the 22nd at 12 o'clock, I'm saying it virtually. Lily, do you want to add anything?
No, just thank you all for coming again. There's been a thumbs up and claps. So
yeah.
And there'll be a blog that Daniel will be updating based on the research he's doing. So if anybody's interested, just mail us and we can keep you in the loop and send you the link to that blog, including the interviews, which are very interesting, with several different makers coming up. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you again, Daniel, and thank you, Scott, for facilitating. Thank you. Thanks, Daniel. Bye, everybody.
Good. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.